Okay, so who said, tell me and I forget?
Photography.
Teach me and I remember? Involve me and I learn? The answers to that and everything you wanted to know about waterfall photography when we return. All right, so that was Benjamin Franklin that said that.
Really?
Yeah, kind of fits, especially for photography, because it's one of those things where you're always learning. You're always learning. Okay, so the basics of waterfall would be, for me anyways, and I'm pretty sure the same for you, is you need a camera, you need a tripod, you need a polarizer. So what we discussed filters last week, or an episode ago. So why do we need a polarizer?
Well, it's easy. Remove reflections from the water.
Yeah, it's amazing how many reflections.
Also off the rocks and everything else too, foliage.
Right, that's what I'm using it for, because there's water everywhere, but it doesn't take a lot of water to cause a reflection.
Not at all.
It really doesn't. So that's one of the things you need. Also, I always like to use a cable release when I'm in there, because I'm using longer exposures. Now, I don't know on yours, but I know there is a beta version of a shutter release, so on the Sony, where I just swipe my hand behind the viewfinder and it'll go off.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I use a wired cable release too. I also use my phone.
Yeah, see the phone nowadays, most phones connect to the newer cameras. Okay, and also neutral density filters.
Yes.
You want to carry some neutral density filters for you. Those are one of the things you want to carry around. So on that side of it, that's what you need in your kit just before you get out and go shooting. That's part of the kit that I carry with me. Okay. You might shoot waterfalls differently than I do. We have different ways of doing it. There's no right or wrong way on shooting a waterfall, especially here, because in BC, some waterfalls are way in the woods. So you're surrounded by clouds, or clouds by trees everywhere. You're not going to get any light into them. And some of the other waterfalls are wide open. So, you know.
Like Lower Myra Falls.
Yeah,
that's a good example. I guess ones in trees, like we did just recently, were Lupin and Karst Falls, right?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of trees, so that means it's darker.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So in that instance, you may not need a neutral density filter.
Correct, yeah.
But you still need the polarizer to cut down that
definitely
down that light. So that's one of the things you're going to end up with. ISO.
As low as you can go, right?
Yeah.
Most cameras nowadays will have a low ISO setting to begin with, usually about 200, I think it is. Some actually have a lower ISO mode you can put it into.
Right. And
I think that brings it down to, in some cases, 100, some cases 50.
Well, if I'm correct in this, and I kind of remember this, my Canon shot at 100, but the Nikon guys 200, unless they went in the firmware and knocked it down to 100. So that was one of the ways. If you're shooting on a full frame, I find my full frame will go down to 50 for an ISO. So that's another kind of advantage on that one. I know my Sony does 100. Your Olympus does 100? I
think it's about 100, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's what we want to shoot. We want to make sure that our exposure is, I like 1 to 3 seconds. Depending where I am, 1 to 3 seconds is usually what I shoot for. What do you shoot for aperture?
Again, that's going to depend on the conditions. I mean, depth of field, usually you're shooting in a fairly short area. It's not like a big grand landscape, so you don't need like f/22. With this camera here right now I'm shooting with, I'm usually around maybe 5.68.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm actually at the other end. That's why I wanted to get into the conversation. I'm at the other end. I'm usually at 20.
Well, here's the thing, right? This guy's got a smaller sensor, so it's actually got more depth of field.
Right.
At a larger aperture. So f8 is actually going to be equivalent to like f16 on your camera.
On my camera, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on that side of it, usually I'm using, again, I'm using a full frame most of the time when I'm out doing portfolio work, I'm on my full frame.
Actually, that's a bit of a hindrance with this camera here, because in a lot of situations now you do have to use a neutral density filter to bring the exposure down.
Sure,
yeah.
would make sense. All right, good point. Okay, so some of us, I'm shooting mirrorless, you're shooting mirrorless.
Funny, eh?
Those of us not shooting mirrorless may also want to look at using mirror lockup.
Correct, yeah.
With mirror lockup, what we want to do is we want to get the mirror up out of the way to steady the camera.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so we want the camera as steady as possible, because a little bit of moving or shake is going to put your image off, could throw your focus off. So usually we put it into mirror lockup, and what happens is then I have to click the shutter button twice. So just be aware of that. You want to get it into mirror lockup. So on that side, it's a good thing to do. Mirror lockup, when I use mirror lockup, I always, half a second to 3 seconds is where I always use my mirror lockup. And that's just a rule of thumb. Is that the same were you, or did you use it?
When I was shooting with cameras that had mirror lockup, it depends on the camera, I'd lock the mirror up. When I was shooting film with for example, my Pentax 6.7, that thing vibrated like crazy. So anything like about a 15th or a little bit higher down through to a couple seconds, it was locked up.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. A couple seconds. There we go.
I watched that camera one time after I hit the mirror lockup button and the mirror dropped down. That camera sat there and vibrated for like a good 5 seconds.
Oh, not cool.
No.
Not cool. Oh, okay.
Mirrorless now, though, it's a lot better because we don't have to worry about that mirror. And in some cases, too, shutter shock, we don't have to worry about that because we can put it in an electronic shutter.
Right.
Right.
Oh, no, that's a valid point, too. Yeah, and another thing I noticed in my notes here is the fact that I'm going to be using a tripod because I'm in the 1 to 3 second mark.
Correct, yeah.
I'm always on a tripod when I start getting in lower than usually 40th of a second. I start looking at putting on tripod. Very, very seldom do I handhold anything under 40th of a second. Putting it onto a tripod, and then once I put it onto the tripod, I get rid of VR, IS, steady shot, whatever you want to call it, depending on the camera you have. I turn all those things off because I'm on a tripod, so the tripod wouldn't have to move.
Yeah, you wouldn't need it really.
No, I just find that's another way of, because if you're, well, not with a wide angle lens, you probably won't see it a lot, but if you're shooting with a 400 millimeter, 600 millimeter lens, you'll actually see it. You can actually see it adjust.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen while I'm on the tripod. I don't need any extra movement once I've got everything set up. So that's usually my approach to shooting a waterfall. Lowest ISO, aperture, again, I'm at the f20, f16 to f20. A polarizer to cut down the reflections, because like it's not just the water, it's the water that's sitting on the rocks and the sheen and the shininess that's on there.
Don't forget any foliage in there too, right? You want to get rid of that.
Yeah, rid of the foliage as well. Yeah, that's true. That's true. IS off and on a tripod. So that's mine. With everything, I adjust my settings, and I keep adjusting my settings. That's one of the other things. The first shot never works for me. Well, sometimes, but not really the first shot.
Well, you're constantly checking. Yeah. Right? I mean, one thing you're checking is your obviously your histogram.
Yeah.
The other thing too is when I'm checking it, we call that chimping, but I'm looking at the back of the camera basically just to see if I got the shot the way I want it. Right?
Composition.
There was one actually where there was actually a little bit of a whirlpool. So the thing with that is what I was doing was I was experimenting with how many seconds I was going to do that exposure, because I wanted to get that whirlpool just right. So some of the shots were too much, some of them were too little, right? So having a digital camera in that situation there is really great. You just don't leave anything to chance. You can test it out.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. That's great with the digital camera because you can usually take multiple shots. So on that side of it, you can continue to get that, what I consider a silky look and not a milky look.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I kind of like to do. It'll take multiple shots, which is fine. So again, as you mentioned before, especially with the whirlpool, before you click, be mindful of your composition. So make sure your composition, where is your main subject? Would it be a stronger image if you use a different crop or a different position? You know, are you following the rule of thirds?
It depends. You know, it's like I'm always looking for different things. Sometimes I'm looking for S-curves. Sometimes I'm looking for just a very strong foreground element to lead that eye in. Hence the whirlpool in front was a good example. Sometimes it could be a leaf on a rock. Sometimes it could be who knows what, right? But just something there that's going to keep the viewer's attention on that image when they're looking at it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. A lot of times for me, I use a lot of leading lines and I look for triangles. That's the way my brain works. I'm looking for leading lines and I'm looking for the triangles to lead people into what I want them to look at. So on that side of it, that's the way I do. Diagonal lines again, create tension. Look for where the light's coming from. Can you move around? Because a lot of times, like I said, your first shot is never usually the best, but you've got an idea what you're looking for, what your settings should be, and then you can start moving around to find that composition that's going to give it the right look for you. And again, it may take 10, 12 tries. It's not something that you can actually get in the first try. Once you've taken your shot, again, stop, take a look around. You know, don't be in a rush to run away and run to the next spot. Take a look around.
There's so much in those areas to photograph. You could literally spend days, if not weeks, in one spot. You know, Myra Falls is a good example of that. There was so much there. We didn't have a lot of time. We were limited on time. But the cool thing about it was that there's so much to see. Sometimes I like smaller things, smaller elements. Sometimes I want the more wide open vista.
Right, no, that's exactly it. That's sometimes you want to zoom into a particular, just a couple of rocks with the water rushing around and try to slow down the water around it. Yeah, we only spent, we only had an hour to spend at Myra Falls. So you're right, that's not a lot of time. Because we had, on that particular day, we had 3 falls to hit because the workshop ran Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we did the workshop, we had 6 hours, we had 3 falls and all the traveling involved. So you were really going. One of the things that I like to do before I forget to mention this is after I've taken the shot is I look heavily at my histogram. I'm depending heavily on the camera to get the focusing done because everything's so small in the back. I still find it 3.5, but the histogram is very important for me.
You want to get your exposure right. That's less time in post, right? Well, that's the big one.
That's, and there's only so much. If you're blowing your histogram in the whites all the way over to the right-hand side, you can't recover that.
No.
Now, if there's some blacks in there, you can pull it back, but unfortunately on that side of it, you're going to pull in some noise with it at the same time. So I'm very seldom do I get a complete bell in the histogram, but we want to make sure we're in between the top and the bottom, and the zones are good on that one as well. So again, that's one of the things that I shoot for. Is making sure the histogram's good. What else we got? Oh yeah, here we go. Be prepared to get wet.
You're not kidding.
Wow, I use hiking boots, and I'm now looking at kind of like rubber boots. But one of the things that I always carry with me again is some way to keep my camera dry. A lot of times in my bag is a green garbage bag. And a green garbage bag for me will do a couple of things. One, if I have to, I can wear it as a rain jacket if I forgot or somebody forgot the rain jacket. But I can also sit on it or lie on it because I can use it as a covering on the ground.
Exactly.
So if I need to sit down, if I want my camera low and I want the tripod low, well, I got to get down on the camera. Usually, but now with yours and mine, you've got a articulating LCD screen in the back, so I can pop my screen out and I can kind of.
One little trick I learned years ago, it was kind of cool, was cloth diapers. Everyone's going to look at it going like,
everyone's going to go,
cloth diapers, what's up with that? They're absorbent. And the cool thing about it is you have 1 or 2 of those in your bag and your camera or your gear gets wet. You can use it to wipe it off. It'll actually wick all that moisture right off of that. And actually, for years I carried one of those, especially in the film days. I'm spoiled now with cameras like this that are actually weatherproof. you know, so I could actually go and be in a deluge and who cares, right? It gets wet, but I still like to keep my gear relatively dry. So that's one thing I'll do. Another thing I'll carry with me too is a lot of my accessories and whatnot I'll carry in the bag, and if I know it's going to be really wet, what I'll do is I'll put them into Ziploc freezer bags. They're really heavy duty bags. Even my phone goes in one.
Oh yeah.
Right? Simple.
Yeah, simple thing, Ziploc freezer bag and away you go.
Yeah.
No, I can understand that as well. Now, your camera is waterproof?
Weatherproof.
Weatherproof. I think the Sony is. Almost guaranteed the Sony's not. I was out shooting this morning and I noticed it was fairly chilly out this morning, so every time I put the lens cap back on, it fogged up.
Yeah.
It was like, eh. And I'm pretty sure if I had a UV filter on it, would have been fogging underneath as well.
Well, that was a trick from living up in northern Manitoba, right? Was your gear went into Ziploc bags. You pushed all the air out and all the condensation happened on the outside of the bag.
Makes sense. But also with living in that type of area, and good point, it's getting colder out now. One of the things I used to do is we used to throw everything into the green garbage bags and then leave it in the basement for the day before you went off and got everything out of the camera. Let it all come back down to a proper temperature normally.
Exactly.
You know, causing less condensation on all the electronics. So that's a good tip. If you haven't been watching the show before, that tip alone. And that brings me up to another tip. We don't have mosquitoes here. We don't have a lot of mosquitoes in Vancouver Island. But if you're shooting waterfalls and other places and you put mosquito repellent on your hands,
ooh,
what's going to happen is that it'll eat parts of your camera.
well, you'll have a perfect hand grip that's actually got your fingerprints in it. So yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah, so be careful of DEET and all that thing. So if you need to use mosquito repellent or anything along that lines, make sure you wash it off your hands afterwards.
That's right.
Suffer through with the mosquitoes eating your hands and nothing else. But DEET, that'll eat through your camera. Didn't you have a story of somebody using a camera?
No, it was actually in the Army. We were issued these angle head flashlights, and one guy had his hand slathered with this insect repellent, and what happened was he was holding on to that light one night there, and the next morning he noticed he had a custom fitted flashlight. It had actually his handprint right on the whole thing. It was kind of cool. He had a heck of a time when he turned that back in to the quartermaster because he wouldn't take it.
Oh, wouldn't take it. No,
he was going to make him pay for it, right? Fingerprints and all.
Fingerprints and all, yeah. Like, wow. Yeah, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah, so it does craze plastic. It's crazy.
Yeah, okay. So our top tips for shooting waterfalls: lowest ISO,
It's ISO,
tripod.
tripod, tripod, tripod.
Yep. Polarizer,
Important.
neutral density filters, mirror lockup, and what was the other one? I had another one in my mind. And shutter release.
Yeah.
And again, shutter release as many ways as you want.
Well, if you don't have it, use the self-timer. Usually most cameras nowadays have a self-timer in 2-second mode.
Yep.
That's what I do in a pinch. Yep.
Yeah,
works.
you can use the self-timer mode, that's
You
for
got
sure.
it.
And check your histogram and shoot often. And that's about all I've got.
That's about all I've got too.
All right, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Who Said Photography.
Bye for now.
Bye.